Real conscience. We can observe our inner bitter conversations and their particular forms of self-justification, which repeats itself continually in deeply negative states. There is value to expression, so writing things down, things which are the result of self-observation, has intrinsic value. P.D. Ouspensky taught his students to write down the things that were observed in themselves over a short period of time. He cautioned, however, about locking the door in case anyone should come in and see what had been written, because if things are written down they become clearer, as so much of our self-observation is inadequate. Incomplete self-observation is certainly inevitable at first. By writing down what we observe in ourselves we make that observation fuller. We remember more. Keeping a journal in which we write down things about ourselves, about the work, about our observations and what we think about others, has value. Suppose a person writes down their observations of inner complaints against others in their journal, as they arise each day over a period of time. It is of course necessary to be sincere with oneself when we do this. It is important to write down everything, because if we do just that we will be surprised when turning the pages over to see exactly the same things taking place in us a year ago, or even a year before that, while all of that time we have probably been convinced that our complaints were quite new and fresh, quite exceptional. Perhaps we might have made inner complaints once or twice in our life before this, but certainly nothing like every day, or even every year. It is observations such as these that give us relationship to our lives, lying in living time, in the fourth dimension. Suppose that we find we have constantly complained about the same thing in everyone, however different from each other the various people might have been. We seem to have the same complaint against quite different individuals. Then what conclusion can be drawn from this observation of ourselves? What conclusion could be drawn from these patterns? The only conclusion that can be reached here is there is something in us that is working all the time, of which we notice only the effects and outcomes. The fault does not lie in other people against whom we have these continual complaints, but something in ourselves that we have not previously observed. Other people close to us may know what that is, or something of what it is anyway, which is the value of reflection and seeing yourself through other people's eyes. But we cannot observe this in ourselves. However, once we come to realize that this reaction of ours is typical, that we have always had complaints in exactly the same way, it will give us quite a shock, perhaps even startle us. We may see that it is this complaining in and of itself that we have to notice, and not what we imagine might be the cause. Next time that those complaining eyes begin to resume their activity, next time that neural pathway is trod, the shock might just be enough to give us the emotional force to observe them before they start using our mouth to express negativity in our name. We will have the shock of remembering, and then checking ourselves, the moment of being separated from those particular eyes. And thereafter no longer identify with them. It should now be possible to observe them as something in ourselves to which we have been giving full sanction and full belief all this time, and which we have been justifying and so nourishing with life force. The work teaches that we should struggle against self-justifying, because self-justifying means always putting ourselves in the right. If an individual always puts themselves in the right, in all circumstances, then they will of course never know what real suffering means. They will become negative, they will pity themselves and seek comfort or solace from others, and in this process use a great deal of force in justifying all that they feel they have to do. Such a person has no real conscience, for when real conscience awakens in an individual, then they know and understand just what real suffering means. This only begins to happen to us once we can bear it. The work teaches that real conscience exists in everybody, and is exactly the same in all of us, however it is deeply buried. And so we have to find it outside of us first, in the form of esoteric teaching, which once accepted by our understanding, and lived through self-will, then it begins to connect us with our inner and real conscience. By means of which we can know and see what everything is, its quality and its use. If, on the other hand, we continually justify ourselves, and who among us can prevent this, then we will always be in the right, and the more our blame is pressed home on us, the more, so to speak, will our pride and vanity make us kick and scream, till we shut our ears, close our eyes and refuse to acknowledge anything. When better and more conscious eyes within us try to speak, in the midst of that self-justifying, we simply will not listen to them, and may even become more agitated. Sanity will prevail at a later stage, once our auto-response mechanisms begin to fade. Then we seem to find ourselves in quite another atmosphere, a different light, which illumines our mind in a very different way. The state we were in previously, The eyes under whose power we fell are at a distance now and no longer hypnotize us. It is useful through self-observation to try to remember what happened in this state, how things looked, what eyes said what and what voices spoke when, what arguments were presented and so on, only we must be careful that we do not identify and backslide to re-enter that state, which can easily happen, particularly at first with rather chronic negative states. It is sometimes worth observing what happens within, when we deliberately revive some pain point in memory, then note what power it still has over us. As long as we maintain the focus of conscious awareness, then we are in no danger. However, if for a moment our attention is distracted, as by someone coming into the room, a little later we will find all those eyes that were revived are actually in charge of us once more. We have become identified with those eyes. When we observe ourselves in a state of attention, and all real conscious self-observation demands inner attention, then we are in no danger of becoming identified by recalling older scenarios. It is like being surrounded by a magic circle when a conjurer calls up spirits, but once our attention breaks, we may backslide into that old state once again. Different states have immense power over us when we are in them. And everyone is able to notice this with regard to every side of their lives. When we are out of them, they lose their power. Our usual state is to go around in a circle of recurring states, which exert great power over us, one by one, each in their turn. Negative states attract other negative states to themselves, and we have all observed that when we are in a negative state our memory is different, it becomes very selective, and the unpleasant things move up to the foreground, all pleasant things fade and become faint or indistinct. Say for example an argument for something becomes emphasized, and the argument against it grows weak. We cannot be identified with unpleasant things and with pleasant things both at the same time. In the case of eyes, we are identified with one eye, although we may see and hear a different eye. Sometimes by completely relaxing, breathing deeply and knowing that we are in a wrong state, then trying to stop all thought, movement and tension both in our muscles and in our mind, the situation can be reversed, and a better state assumed. We suddenly feel a change of sign in ourselves, and everything becomes lighter. It is as though we have been wearing a lot of oppressive and constricting garments, then they suddenly fall away, and we once again feel free. This stopping of thought and relaxing, which is so important, is a form of self-remembering. Self-observation without self-remembering is simply not good practice. The two things are quite distinct from each other through inner taste. We can think of self-remembering from one standpoint, as a kind of lifting oneself up from the uproar and turmoil within, or of opening a door then going into another room and shutting the door behind us, then sitting down quietly in a comfortable to relax. Or taking a walk, and breathing in a change of air, to disengage our world view. Remember that when we are identified with all of our thoughts and feelings, our emotions and sensations, our grievances, inner monologues, self-justifying, and our account-making, we cannot possibly remember ourselves. We are right in the thick of the fog, right in the noise of traffic, right in the midst of the madding crowd, which is not who we truly are. It is a liberating sensation to experience a moment of not being identified with oneself, with all of this uproar, with all of the ever-recurring and useless turmoil. It is then possible to realize how we ordinarily identify, and how nothing can ever be quite real, nothing can ever be right when we are in such a state. We realize how true it is that help cannot reach us whilst we are in this ordinary state called the second state of consciousness of this teaching. It is only once that quietness begins that help can reach us from the higher parts of our own centers, from higher centers themselves which are fully developed and always working within. However, they can only reach us when we are in the third state of consciousness, in some degree of self-remembering.